Sounds
Afternoon,
good.
everyone. Thanks for attending our speech. I'm Brad Whitesell, also known by my internet handle Echofrost. I'm the Watercress coding director, and I'm joined by Tristan Barber, also known by the internet handle Wolf, who is our
Hello.
studio director. Basically, we're going to run this talk like we would a public meeting in our own Discord, partly because that's the way we like to do things, also because we didn't have a ton of time to prepare for it. So let's hop right in. Our talk today is on pitfalls and getting out. Basically, a talk about how to manage and maintain a freeware visual novel studio. We'll start out with a little bit of introduction and background. Our studio was formed out of the Katawa Sojo subreddit early August in 2014. We've recruited hundreds of members, as Wolf mentioned earlier, across various platforms and around the globe. So we've had lots of different experience, lots of different community. We've had a total of 4 VN releases: LOL, Palinurus, Fare Thee Well, and Seeds of Sylvia. Palinurus just hit Steam. Go check it out. It's lots of fun. Big update soon, by the way. Just a subtle plug. Drink. Um, and we're giving this talk today because our studio has experienced various challenges and growths, and we hope that we can pass something on so another up-and-coming studio can learn from us. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about our studio's values, because regardless of whether or not you're running a freeware studio or a commercial studio, values are what make up the foundation of your studio. And since I'm a computer engineering student, I like to make parallels with the manifesto for agile software development, which I think is a super great reference for development. Just to run through real quick some of our studio values and how we rank them. Firstly, we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We think that the people are significantly more important than any processes we lay out or equipment that we use. Following that, working software, much better than comprehensive documentation. Comprehensive documentation is great, especially when you're running a volunteer studio, because oftentimes we add and drop members at a very rapid pace. There's quite the turnover. So having good documentation is nice, but a working product at the end is definitely much better. Next, then our final parallel to the Agile Software Development Manifesto is we value compromise over intransigence. There's very few times where following a plan is much better than compromising. Especially with creative difference, as we talked about during lunch a little bit. It just causes feuds, and it is easy to corrupt and poison a freeware studio. So one of the big things with operating and being a volunteer in a freeware studio is that you have to have an open mind. Additionally, we value the collective over the individual. The individual is very important. We care a lot for the individual, but at the end of the day, we really want to keep our studio running. So we have to make decisions that will ultimately maintain the life of the studio. Next, we would rather be a community catalyst and a collaborator than we would be developers. There's a lot of talent in this field, as has been demonstrated by some of the previous talks and by all the wonderful members of our Discord chat. There's some really great creative minds, and so it's definitely more important to us to be able to help those minds out, be able to collaborate and communicate than it is to get our own products out, especially since we're not for-profit and this is volunteer work. We have no real deadlines on anything, which is a good and a bad thing in its own ways. Responding to change over following a plan kind of correlates with a compromise versus intransigence. We value initiative over following orders for sure. We'll talk more about that in a little bit when we get to our workflow. And then two of the biggest things for us are these last 2 bullet points: attitude over technical skill. A lot of us joined Watercress so that we can improve our personal skills, and poor negative attitudes are what destroys a group of people trying to better themselves, better their personal skills. So attitude definitely trumps technical skill in every aspect. Everyone can learn, but it's hard for people to change attitudes.
You
Is
can
the
be the
way I see
best
it.
artist in the world, but if you have a poor attitude, then you mean nothing. You're worthless. You have to be able to work in a team.
And then finally, for values, personal life over studio life. When you're running a freeware studio, everyone that's working for you is volunteer, right? We hardly, like I should say hardly, because we have commissioned before. We don't really commission. We don't do any of that stuff. And honestly, the well-being of our members is definitely more important than what you can give to the studio. It's especially since a lot of us are students and working. Our age group is primarily late teens, early 20s. So people have really, really hectic and busy lives, and those are definitely more important than whatever project we're working on at the time. Then just real quick, because I've already taken up a lot of time with values, I want to talk about our visual novel values. These don't matter as much to the well-being of the studio, but I thought it would be important to touch on them. First, we value quality stories. As I mentioned earlier, this is the premise of any VN, and it's really a big impact on the industry image. I don't play tons of VNs, I'll admit, but I often see ones that have really poor writing that really give the industry a bad name. So we focus highly on writing quality stories over anything else. Next, innovation, expanding platform, trying new things. That's really how the industry moves, and that's how we expand our audience. So it's definitely more important to us. And then platform, again, availability is key, especially with all the mobile devices on the rise. And now that RenPy, which is the main engine we use, supports iOS and Android, there's no reason not, to expand platform.
Right. We're currently testing for an Android release of Palinurus. Unfortunately, the Apple release is probably never going to come, given how many loops you have to jump through for that. So now is on to my part, natural selection of volunteers. This is really important because you have to have the right people, you have to have the right team to make the games you want to make. No matter how much you are gung-ho about your project, no matter how much you like making VNs, if you don't choose your studio members wisely, and if you don't work with them, then you're going to fail. You're going to fail. We broke it up into about 6 different areas. The first one I dabble in a lot, determining characteristics, looking at their personality type and how that'll affect their interaction with everyone else in the studio. If they have some hobbies, interests that they can talk to you about, so you're relatable. What culture they come from, because someone from Finland is going to be very different than, say, someone from Florida, and learning to work with people who aren't all the same. And again, personality, like, for sure, personality needs to be there. Like, you need to know people and make sure they can work together. Communication is really important. We have a lot of communication things we use, like Discord and Trello and stuff like that. But you need to make sure that when you're talking to other people, you're using a tone that they can recognize. A lot of communication is lost over text, and that's what a lot of us do. We use text. You can't see facial expressions. You can't hear tone. And a lot of that's going to cause misunderstandings. So make sure that, like what I do, I use a lot of emoticons. Make sure people know that you're either being sarcastic, or make sure people know your tone. It's very important. Teamwork. You want to hire people, or you want to recruit people who have social skills, who know how to interact with other people, and who aren't going to be the rotten egg in the bunch. Make sure everyone wants to contribute, and make sure everyone's motivated. We'll talk about motivation later with leadership. Work ethic is very important. If people have worked in some field, even if it's fast food before, at least they know how to work. And so make sure that they are willing to work for you. This part takes a lot of time to determine. It might be months before you know how hard someone works. And also look over the stuff they have, like on the social media. If they're a writer, look at their fan fictions. If they're an artist, look at their DeviantArt or Pixiv. SoundCloud for musicians. See how often they release their work. That'll determine how productive they seem to be. Skillfulness, not as important. definitely personality is the important one. But you also want someone that is relatively skilled, or else you're not going to make a good game. And if they aren't as skilled as you want them to be, make sure that they're willing to improve. And lastly, on this slide, obstacles. There's going to be a lot of obstacles to quote-unquote employment, be it them having long work hours or a really shitty home life. If you're a leader, or even if you're a follower in the studio, make sure you spend time to try and help them with their obstacles, and make sure you show them that you really care. If they have long work hours, work with them to find good times for them to work. If they have a really bad home life, spend time with them whenever you can. Stuff like that leaves an impression. And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Yeah.
So next we want to talk a little bit about how workflow runs in a freeware visual novel studio, specifically ours. And workflow can be kind of interesting. I titled this slide Conventionally Unconventional because our workflow can be very, very time-consuming. It's not conventional in a time constraint sense, but it's conventional in the sense that we are able to get quality products out at the end of the day. So generally, our workflow starts with a volunteer, one of our members, coming up with an idea to further our project. This can be anything. As a member of the coding team, my go-to example is image maps for UI. Say a member of the coding team or our team comes forward and they're like, I have an idea to further this project by implementing image maps. So the next step for that is personal research. What we like people to do is, rather than asking exactly how to do it, to go out on their own and discover how to do it. Like Ren'Py documentation for the coding team, there's not really a ton of excuse to not spend some time reading through it. So we encourage people to go out, research how to accomplish their goals, and practice their own design through as many iterations as needed. Next step in our workflow is to do it. As a volunteer, you don't even have to have communicated this a lot with many of the other team members. We encourage people to just do it, to try it, to see what it does. And generally the next step is running it by your team's director. The hierarchy in Watercress Studios is usually we have creative teams, examples, coding team, writing team, art team, music team, that have an individual or two as their group directors. We encourage volunteers to seek their approval and feedback, especially. That's the most important part. Constructive criticism and feedback is a big role in being a director. After that, it can be discussed with other creative leads. Inter-team communication is really important because we want all of our creative assets to flow together really well. So we spend time during scheduled meetings or exemplary meetings in our Discord, talking with each other, making sure everyone approves and that it will fit in our product. And so after all that's completed, it's implemented into the piece of work that we're working on. And this is a really slow process just because there's so many steps and because it's really reliant on the volunteer work ethic. But it definitely is a product of the environment we encourage, which involves expanding your own skill set and quality work. So, do you want to go ahead and talk about atmosphere?
Yeah, atmosphere is very important. Yeah, I titled this the sub-bullet is promoting friendliness and interpersonal relationships over a professional work environment. It's really important that in a studio, like, you do have a professional work environment, yes, but make sure you're friendly and you have relationships. You need to build the bond of the other people in your studio, especially in a volunteer studio. The money is not why they're staying, because you don't make money. They're staying because they believe in the vision that your studio has, and they believe in the people in the studio. So if you don't make connections, there's no reason for people to stay in the studio at all. So if you're looking into being a studio, and you're probably going to start out free before you go into paid, you need to be really good at forging bonds and having an atmosphere that promotes said bonds. For example, there are a lot of things you could do. particular what we've done a lot in terms of going above and beyond. We've done public events with members invited, like live streams, Q&A, and stuff like that. We've done a lot of live streams in the past. We share personal experiences. Like we game together, we talk with no goal in mind, we hang out whenever we have some free time that we aren't devoting to real life. You also look for opportunities to express thoughts to the public. Development blogs is how we tend to do it. In the past, we let our writers, musicians, artists, etc. talk about what they're passionate about to the public and give them opportunities to reach out to other people. And lastly, the most difficult part of physical meetings, it's going to be really hard, and oftentimes you won't be able to accomplish this one, but we've been relatively successful in meeting team members in real life, flying out to meet them. We've gone to conventions together, stuff like that, and that really means a lot to people. And secondly, and really important, especially for leadership, is morale. It's more important than development even. You need to make sure that everyone's happy or else you're just going to fall apart. Everyone's unpaid, so it's very important. And secondly, don't let the hype train derail your studio. You need to make well thought out estimated guesses in terms of deadlines and project releases. Most people will think, oh, we have this 7-act, 2 million word game out in 2 years. So when in reality, all that's inflated. You won't make a game, or a 7-act game. It won't be 2 million words, and it most certainly won't be out by the end of the 2018 fiscal year. You need to make sure you're being realistic.
So I'll let you speed through this real quick. We only have like 4 more minutes.
Yeah, I realized, and this is the big part, so we'll be really quick at this. When it comes to pitfalls and climbing out, they're 2 different things, challenges and pitfalls. Challenges are things that take a longer amount of time, but they're not as dangerous. This is stuff like management in terms of life versus the studio, balancing your work with your dev time and your family with the dev time. That stuff will come with time. The big things are pitfalls, though. They're hard to notice, very difficult things to manage, such as discontent within the studio, malice, managing a melting pot of people, and using a myriad of communication tools to accomplish this. They're very, very difficult to handle and are almost unavoidable. They're also the most deadly to the studio. Everyone operates differently, and this disconnect causes a lot of issues. The best way to handle this, in my opinion, is to be accepting and forgiving when you can, yet willing to do what is necessary when you have to. The leadership must want to do what's right, but they must be willing to do what's necessary for the studio to survive. This leads right into ethics. At first, you will want to be very nice to those you work with if you're a leader. It's okay as long as they aren't taking advantage of you. If someone's being toxic, warn them. If they fail to change after 3 warnings, then they need to leave, one way or another. This sucks, but it's necessary. As it says in the PowerPoint, don't let rotten eggs spoil the basket. And next, don't be a democracy. I know democracy is really nice, but democracy doesn't work. You are a company, not a country. Democracy is mob rule, and if you're starting out unpaid, many of your volunteers will be amateurs, not paid professionals. They don't have experience to empathize with leadership. They have a nutsy mod mentality, if you know from Reddit, but it's on a more serious, powerful, and dangerous scale. It doesn't mean that they're bad people, it just means that they've fallen victim to human condition, especially groupthink. And if you're a leader, you know more than the average member. It's compartmentalization that's often necessary. It's lack of information from the average member. This disconnect will often lead your volunteers to believing that you're up to no good, or you're keeping things from them, stuff like that, despite no evidence to support that belief. If you give them the chance to vote in leadership, the squeaky wheel will become the new leader, which is often the loudest revolutionary. There's a reason why countries, after revolutions, often fail. The dog doesn't know what to do when it finally catches the car. And you as a leader will often have more expertise than the average member. So you need to be very active in terms of your knowledge and make sure you share with everyone else. And the lack of experience from other members will cause issues. You need to be nice, but be firm. You're here to make games, not to play Bureaucracy Simulator 2017. And just to quickly, before we end, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are how you learn. If you succeed, you know a single way to make a game. But if you fail, you know plenty of things about how not to make a game. Um, Mistakes determine how mature you are. Uh, Dare live again, yeah. Um, you need to make sure that when you fail, you need to exploit it. You need to look at why your studio failed or why you failed. And failure isn't only determined by fans and profits. Failure is very much about being a leader, a follower, a content creator, even as a person. You are going to fail in life. It's inevitable. You will fail. You just have to learn how to manage it and how to learn from your mistakes. Improve yourself and forge onward despite knowing you failed in the past. Um, Watercress is especially good at this, given that we have failed majorly twice. A lot of us call Watercress a zombie or a phoenix studio because of this. It's really bad to fail, but we have forged on because we have learned from our failures.
Inclusion. We've gone 2.5 years strong now, so I guess that's something. We were told when we first started by our biggest inspiration, Four Leaf Studios, so we wouldn't survive more than 2 weeks of dead time, and here we are. So, like you said, bumps exist, don't keep you from following your dreams. Running a volunteer studio is not about money or fame or leading the industry, even though those all are super nice things. It's about growing yourself personally with your own personal technical skills, telling quality stories and narratives, making connections with people like this event is doing right now, and having a good time. Really, at the end of the day, that's all anyone can ask for is having lots of fun making VNs. And so I guess we'll take questions for the last 4 minutes.
Cool. Thank you, guys. All right, you guys got questions? Because we have 4 minutes.
I was surprised when we were originally outlining it. It was like, oh, I hope we have enough content. But then it became quickly, we have too much content.
Yeah, like I skipped a significant portion about leadership. Dear God.
Are you guys going to aim at turning a profit? It's definitely a goal. Like if we could all make money making VNs, that would be wonderful. The biggest problem is we have a lot of collaborators, lots of people that are on and off on the team, and basically people work at different rates. So we may have one artist that's cranking out sprites like no other, and another artist that occasionally makes a background. Both are useful, but both have definitely different work ethics, and so it becomes a problem of managing equal pay and paying for effort, if that makes any sense.
Right. And team conflict anecdotes. We don't have enough time for that, unfortunately. Like, if you want to talk later about that, I will talk your ear off. But a few highlights, I guess. Early on in development, we had to deal with a neo-Nazi. And later on, we've had to deal with a lot of people who have mental health issues. And generally, it's not a bad thing. And we're very supportive in that. Like, plenty of our current devs have mental health issues, but sometimes people aren't prepared to work in the studio with that.
Who should be hired first and who should be hired last when developing a visual novel, as in does hiring a writer come first? We'd like to try to keep our teams pretty balanced. Right now we have an overwhelmingly strong music team. So right now we're looking for artists and writers and coders. I don't know. It really depends. It's one of those things where we'll really take any help, but it's good to keep teams small to avoid bureaucracy, like was mentioned earlier. And again, the larger the studio, the higher chance there is for conflict. So
yeah,
below 20 members is preferable.
Yeah, if you have no one, if you're starting a studio from scratch, I'd recommend getting writers first, and then going from the hardest to get to the easiest to get, which would be artists, musicians, then coders, then writers. So start out with writers because that's the base of your game, and then move to the harder bits. Artists being by and far the hardest to find.
All right. Well, we've got 1 minute to go, so I'm going to hand this off to Kawasumi. But thank you guys, and you guys can continue asking questions on Discord.